What if the ancient world was not simple, slow, and primitive, but brilliant, organized, and far ahead of what we were taught to expect? Across deserts, jungles, mountains, islands, and river valleys, archaeologists have uncovered ruins that tell a different story. These were not isolated tribes barely surviving. These were people who aligned monuments, engineered roads, managed water, standardized construction, measured time, and built cities that still challenge modern understanding. For generations, history was often told as a straight ladder. First simple villages, then farming, then cities, then science, then civilization. But the evidence no longer fits that neat sequence. At Göbekli Tepe, large ritual architecture appears before farming was fully established. In the Indus civilization, large cities emerged with planning and sanitation on a remarkable scale. In the Maya world, sky observation and mathematics produced one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in human history. Smithsonian. This documentary is not about fantasy. It is not about magic. It is not about giving ancient people superpowers they never had. It is about taking them seriously. Over the next hour, we will examine 126 facts that force us to admit something uncomfortable. Many so-called lost civilizations were far more advanced than we thought. One of the biggest shocks in archaeology came from southeastern Turkey. Göbekli Tepe is roughly 11,000 years old, older than Stonehenge by thousands of years. What makes it extraordinary is not just its age, but what it implies. Massive T-shaped pillars, carved with animals and symbols, were arranged in ceremonial enclosures by people who appear to have been hunter-gatherers. That matters because, for a long time, scholars assumed that only settled farmers could organize enough labor, food surplus, and coordination to build monuments of this scale. But Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite may be true. Collective ritual and social coordination may have come first, helping drive the transition toward settled life rather than merely emerging from its Smithsonian. This site forces us to rethink the foundations of civilization itself. If monument building, symbolic complexity, and organized labor could appear before cities, before writing, and even before fully developed agriculture, then our old model is too simple. The ancient world was not waiting for civilization to begin. In places like Göbekli Tepe, civilization was already experimenting with form. If Göbekli Tepe disrupts our ideas about early ritual complexity, the Indus world destroys the stereotype that ancient cities were dirty, chaotic, and improvised. The Indus civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, was one of the world's earliest urban cultures and among the most extensive Britannica. Its major centers, especially Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, display planning that still feels astonishing. Streets were laid out in rational patterns. Standardized bricks were used across wide regions. Drainage systems, bathrooms, and water control features reveal careful civic design. Britannica notes that the civilization contained 2 large cities and more than 100 towns and villages, while the wider system showed remarkable uniformity in weights and measures. Britannica. This matters because sophistication is not only about giant monuments. Sometimes it is about systems. It is about standardization. It is about urban design that works. The Indus people may not have left easily readable royal inscriptions or towering conquest monuments, but what they built suggests a civilization deeply invested in order, administration, and practical intelligence. Ancient intelligence is often underestimated when it is encoded in symbols rather than machines. The Maya remind us that knowledge does not need steel towers to be sophisticated. It can be written in calendars, in ritual cycles, in architecture aligned to celestial rhythms, and in the disciplined observation of the sky. According to the Smithsonian's Maya Calendar Project, the ancient Maya were accomplished observers of the heavens and used astronomy and mathematics to create one of the most accurate calendar systems in human history. Smithsonian. Their system included the Hob, the Tzolk'in, the calendar round, and the long count, overlapping cycles that tracked ritual, solar, historical, and cosmic time. This was not abstract knowledge for the sake of prestige alone. It shaped ceremonies, agricultural cycles, social memory, and political authority. The Maya were not merely watching stars. They were integrating celestial order into the structure of life itself. And in many communities, those traditions never entirely disappeared. Ancient knowledge survived, adapted, and continued. When people think of Angkor, they often picture temple towers rising from the jungle. But the real genius of Angkor was not only artistic. It was infrastructural. UNESCO describes the site as a vast archaeological complex that includes temples, basins, dikes, reservoirs, canals, and communication routes across roughly 400 square kilometers UNESCO. That means Angkor was not just a sacred space. It was a managed landscape. Water was captured, directed, stored, and integrated into urban life on a scale few ancient societies achieved so visibly. The architecture and spatial organization of the Khmer capitals testify to a high level of social order and ranking UNESCO.I. In other words, Angkor was a city system, a hydraulic civilization, a demonstration that engineering, religion, environment, and political power could be fused into a single monumental world. It was not merely beautiful. It was organized. For too long, Great Zimbabwe was surrounded by colonial-era denial. Some outsiders simply refused to believe that Africans had built something so sophisticated. But the evidence is clear, and UNESCO is explicit. Great Zimbabwe is the architectural and cultural achievement of a major African civilization built between the 11th and 15th centuries. UNESCO. Its stone enclosures, passageways, and monumental walls display high craftsmanship. UNESCO also notes evidence of long-distance trade, including glass beads, porcelain from China and Persia, and coins from Kilwa, showing that Great Zimbabwe was connected to the wider world. UNESCO. This is one of the key lessons of the ancient world. Complexity is global. Great Zimbabwe was not an isolated curiosity. It was a political center, a sacred landscape, and a trading power. When we underestimate lost civilizations, we are often repeating old prejudice more than following evidence. In Peru's Soup Valley, another long-held assumption collapsed. Caral soup pushed the timeline of urban civilization in the Americas back by more than 1,000 years. Stunning scholars when its dates were confirmed. Smithsonian. UNESCO describes Caral as the earliest known manifestation of civilization in the Americas and highlights its monumental platform mounds, sunken circular courts, town planning, and even early use of the quipu as a recording device. UNESCO. This is not the image many people carry of the ancient Americas before later empires. It is a much older story of organized construction, political complexity, and regional influence. Caral matters because it reminds us how much of the past remained invisible simply because it had not yet been excavated, dated, or taken seriously. History did not change because the past changed. History changed because our ignorance was exposed. Off the shore of Pohnpei lies one of the most visually startling archaeological sites on Earth, Nan Madol. UNESCO describes it as a ceremonial center made of megalithic basalt structures spread across more than 100 small islets. UNESCO. The walls were built using massive columnar basalt stones transported from quarries elsewhere on the island and laid in a distinct construction technique. UNESCO emphasizes the huge scale, technical sophistication, and concentration of elaborate structures as evidence of complex social and religious organization. UNESCO. Nan Madol is important not because it fits a familiar model, but because it doesn't. It reminds us that civilization does not always look like Rome, Egypt, or Mesopotamia. Complexity can arise in island worlds, in ceremonial landscapes, in basalt channels, and in political systems shaped by the SEIN. The American Southwest, Chaco shows that ancient sophistication was not limited to isolated monuments. Britannica describes Chaco as an administrative, economic, and ceremonial center of the ancestral Pueblo world from about 850 to 1250 CE. Britannica. Its architecture was sophisticated, but what stands out even more is connectivity. Major structures were linked by wide, straight roadways, and the broader region included hundreds of miles of engineered roads. Trade materials such as turquoise, obsidian, and macaw feathers suggest long-distance exchange networks extending far beyond the Canyon. Britannica. Civilization is often measured by what rises vertically, towers, pyramids, walls. But Chaco reminds us to think horizontally. Roads are a form of intelligence. Logistics are a form of power. Connectivity is civilization. At this point, a question becomes unavoidable. What do we even mean by advanced? Too often, we use modern industrial standards as the only measure. Metal skyscrapers, engines, electricity, digital systems. But that standard blinds us. A civilization can be advanced in water management, calendar science, social coordination, stone engineering, trade integration, ecological adaptation, or symbolic systems, without ever inventing the modern machine. The people of the ancient world solved different problems under different conditions. They did not fail to become us. They became themselves. The Maya mastered time. Angkor mastered hydraulic scale. The Indus world mastered urban planning. Great Zimbabwe mastered drystone monumentality and trade. Chaco mastered regional connectivity. Caral mastered early urban political form. Göbekli Tepe mastered collective ritual architecture at astonishing depth. When we say they were more advanced than we thought, what we really mean is that our categories were too small. The old narrative gave modernity all the intelligence and gave the past all the darkness. Archaeology keeps proving that this story is false. Why did we underestimate them for so long? Partly because ruins survive unevenly. Wood rots. Textiles vanish. Oral traditions are ignored. Floods bury cities. Jungles swallow roads. Deserts hide foundations. And when material evidence is incomplete, imagination often fills the gaps with arrogance. Partly, too, because older scholarship was shaped by empire, racism, and assumptions about who could and could not create complexity. African achievements were denied. Indigenous planning was minimized. Non-literate cultures were called simple. Monumental knowledge systems that did not resemble Europe's were treated as curiosities rather than intellectual achievements. But the ruins remained. And once excavation, dating, aerial mapping, and interdisciplinary archaeology improved, the old dismissals became harder to defend. The lesson is not only that ancient civilizations were sophisticated. It is also that modern people can be shockingly bad at recognizing sophistication when it appears in unfamiliar forms. By now, the phrase lost civilization should sound different. Not romantic, not mystical, not childish, serious, human, real. These societies were not lost because they lacked intelligence. Many were lost, fragmented, transformed, conquered, abandoned, absorbed, or misremembered. But they were never empty of thought. The record is clear. Monumental ritual before farming. Cities with sanitation and planning. Calendars of astonishing accuracy. Water systems on urban scales. Stone architecture without mortar. Early urban civilization in the Americas. Basalt ceremonial cities in the Pacific. Engineered roads across desert landscapes. These are not marginal footnotes. These are corrections. Each discovery forces us to widen the definition of what human beings were capable of, and how early they became capable of it. The more archaeology advances, the less flattering our old assumptions look. So perhaps the biggest rewrite is this: ancient civilizations were not waiting for history to begin. They were already making it.